Wagwan, everybody. Welcome to the Dis Affamie History podcast, where we'll be speaking about history and as well family history and how history relates in terms of Caribbean people for the present as well as in the past, and how in the past what that does and brings forth for what we are going through at present and what we can learn from our history, from our family, and take that moving forward. So I do hope you enjoy the podcast. And if you like it, please ensure to subscribe, like, and review. Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter, for coming on to the podcast and speaking about Caribbean teas, which I'm sure a lot of us are familiar with in terms of drinking those special Sunday drinks in most households. Would have been, especially being from North American, myself from Canada. So I'll have you first start with introducing yourself.
Great. Thank you so much, Wendy, for the invitation to be a part of your podcast series. I have a great investment in our heritage, and I welcome the opportunity to share that bit of my knowledge with you. I will say that I am currently the director of the Biocultural Education and Research Program. But previously, I was acting in my role as a chemist, head of department of the Department of Chemistry at the Barbadian Community College. I decided that I wanted to, after putting in, what I thought was an important contribution into our educational system and chemical education, you know, training young minds in the discipline and seeing them go forward and also make their contributions. I thought that I wanted to come out and get closer to communities and be more involved with community education, and hence the name biocultural education, because I wanted to educate the public about the importance of our plant biodiversity in the Caribbean and the value associated with the traditional knowledge that is embedded in how we use the plants. In that context, then we do a lot of community outreach, and we can talk, as we go through our discussion, a little more about that. In Also, one of the first things that I achieved when I did come out of being a more, rigorous academia is I formed a company with two colleagues, Jacqueline Cumberbatch and Andrea Fleming. I mention their names because I always need to let others know that there's a partnership involved.
Yes.
And we had a passion for just what we're going to discuss here today, the traditional knowledge associated with the use of plants for making tea. And we formed a company called Heritage Teas, and we actually produce a brand of teas available in Barbados. But when individuals come to the island, of course, they can purchase and take back with them because they're also available at our airport. So we wanted to make that contribution. It's a commercial product, but we see ourselves as ambassadors of our heritage as well.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I'll make sure that the show notes indicate in terms of for the link for your company, if people do want to purchase it, then they can be able to purchase it online as well.
Certainly.
Perfect. So first we'll start off with, if you just provide us, I guess, with a brief overview of the traditional teas in the Caribbean and their cultural significance.
Yes. So, across the Caribbean, we share a common history. That a lot of it is based in colonialism. We also have to acknowledge that before colonialism spread across the Caribbean, we had a thriving indigenous culture. Colonialism saw, of course, the horrors of the Atlantic slave trade, which brought many Africans across the ocean As they were considered commodities, they were distributed across the Caribbean, and even Brazil. I think Brazil happens to have one of the largest populations resulting from that slave trade activity. In addition to that, of course, we had the indentured servants, if you want to use that word, which I don't like to respond to it in terms of servitude, but it was.
Yes.
And they came over from places like India and brought their culture as well. And we also have to admit, of course, that the European culture would have been infused. So it became a melting pot, um, not always a happy melting pot, but it became a melting pot. And so this is reflected in how we carry on the tradition of tea making and tea drinking. So the European component comes in terms of the use of the plant Camellia sinensis, which can be treated at various levels to give us what we call green tea or black tea. And I remember, growing up with a grandmother who always had to have her cup of her green tea, as she used to call it. And as a young child, you are sort of questioning the need, because she had to have that tea. And she was also a great baker, and she'd always make sure that she was baking something to accompany that cup of tea. And that was a tradition in many households in Barbados and across the Caribbean as well. However, our ancestors coming from myriad countries brought with them their traditions in terms of the knowledge of plants to make herbal teas. And so we've got that tradition across the Caribbean of producing herbal teas, but we also call them cooling teas. Cooling teas are thought to be not only for purposes of maybe relaxation at the end of the day, but also to put the body into a good health status. So we have that tradition of cooling teas that is expansive across the Caribbean. And then interestingly, we've also got what we call cocoa tea, which is based on the use of the cacao bean and the chocolate that we make from that, producing a very pleasant brew with spices like nutmeg and cinnamon. And then you add, if you want a sweetener or other agents to that. But cocoa tea was also a very popular thing when I was a young person growing up. And that is also very popular across the Caribbean. So, in terms of an overview, we have adopted the European culture in terms of using green tea. And the interesting thing is that the Europeans, of course, adopted that tradition as well, understandably from China, and they began to import the tea leaves, I think in the 1700s. And the unfortunate thing about needing a sweetening agent actually is thought to have led to them coming to our shores and establishing sugarcane plantations so that the cheap labor, well, no paid labor, forced labor, the sugar could be sent back to fuel, their interest and passion in drinking tea during that period. So we've adopted the European aspect of drinking tea. We also have developed our herbal tea tradition, and cocoa tea is also, there's even a folk song that speaks to that about giving me that cup of cocoa tea.
No, that's great. And especially with cocoa tea, I know that that was a very special thing on a Sunday morning to have,
Right.
with as well the traditional foods to have. So that was a huge, huge thing. And I know that we'll talk about that later on as well. So, with your background, how has your background influenced your passion and exploring and, of course, sharing your knowledge about Caribbean tea culture?
Yeah. It is a story, a narrative I was thinking on. As I mentioned before, my professional studies were based around chemistry. And when I went to pursue my PhD, of course, I was interested in the molecular side of what a plant may produce. And so I was very interested in discovering new molecules, which I did because I happen to love that aspect of science, molecular science, and the properties that molecules can have. Um, and I wouldn't say I have deviated from that, but once you begin to look at that aspect of delving into the value of what a plant produces naturally, you always butt up on the importance of plants to people. Because the plants are here because we recognize their value.
Mhm.
They continue to thrive because we grow them for that value. And therefore, that significance and importance of plants to people emerges in your thinking. And as I delved deeper, did a lot of networking, attended conferences, and observed the intimacy with which persons were interacting with this thematic of plants and people. Um, I then shifted my focus to the Caribbean experience. And in my interest in natural products, I then recognized that there is a lot of history that is not being treated adequately because we need to speak our narratives. And one of the things that I did was I wrote a book entitled Seed Under the Leaf, where I used the reference to one of our plants that I use medicinally. And this particular plant has buds under the leaf. And I use that metaphorically as knowledge. So the buds represent knowledge and they're being protected by the leaf knowledge. So I wrote Seed Under the Leaf because I felt that I needed to reach our public and make the connection between our past, our history, and how that has influenced how we use plants in our contemporary period. And the book was designed not to be overly technical. I wanted it to be not lengthy, but I wanted it to be a source of reconnection. And that book, Seed Under the Leaf, did quite well within Barbados and persons visiting the island as well. And as I'm saying, I became sensitized to the importance of how we use plants, whether it's as a food source, whether it is for casual um, relaxation, preparing a brew, just to sit with friends and enjoy. And most importantly, how we use plants for health. So in that context, the preparation of medicinal teas, and that still kept me in line with my interest in what we call natural products, these natural molecules that plants make, and how we incorporate them in a cup of tea, which is healing.
Yes, definitely. And, I think you mentioned before with the Caribbean countries, having diverse cultures. How
Yes.
does this diversity manifest in the different types of teas consumed in your region?
hmm Um, but I'll treat that in terms of you know we have this shared interest and application of the tea, of the plants for tea. And what is common is this idea of cooling
Mm.
and using plants for cooling. And I initially, I've done some surveys because I wanted again to get into the community and have a better understanding. And I wanted to appreciate what cooling meant. And this term is used across the Caribbean as well. And I researched and I read papers and individuals, we've lost connection a lot with our historical applications. the ideas and the knowledge has not been written down because we were not the ones telling, our stories. So it's difficult. But if you are determined, you will find, the important dynamic. So cooling teas are really teas that relieve what we call oxidative stress. And oxidative stress is linked to illness. So, um, right, or people had to find ways to survive. And the knowledge that they brought, their traditional knowledge that they brought to the Caribbean, that allowed them to recognize plants or related plants, and how these plants were used at their home base, allowed them to emerge a platform for using these plants. And this tradition of using plants for making cooling teas, is seen across the Caribbean. And though we may have slight differences in terms of how we apply them, but the cooling teas are seen to be important in terms of putting the body into a better health status. Now, having said that, we're also very strong in terms of linking medicinal teas to specific illnesses. And so there are some families of plants that are more incorporated in the tradition. And the plants that are incorporated in tradition are the very aromatic plants. Again, it's a matter of observation and application. And so the very aromatic plants are incorporated in teas, in medicinal teas, because those aromatic agents that the plants make are found to be very medicinal. And when you canvass a group of Caribbean people and ask them what they're using the teas for, in addition to cooling teas, you're going to find that they use teas a lot for colds and flu, upper respiratory tract infections. During the COVID period, there were individuals who were well determined that they could assist themselves in the less severe cases of COVID by utilizing some of the plants that we have growing across the Caribbean to relieve symptoms. Now, there's one particular family of plants that is turned to for that, and that family is called the Lamiaceae family. This is the family to which basil, rosemary, mint belong. And we know that these are culinary herbs, culinary because of their aromaticity, but they've also got these medicinal applications because those aromatic compounds are good for healing the respiratory system. So in terms again of the teas, I'm saying broadly that because they've got shared heritage and common traditional knowledge, we find that cooling teas emerge and also medicinal teas.
No, definitely. And, would there be any specific teas that stand out, particularly as unique or representing the Caribbean?
Yeah. Um, I would say again, based on Wendy canvas persons, apparently hibiscus tea is very popular. And hibiscus tea can actually be made from more than one type of plant. We can use the flower to make of the decorative hibiscus plant, the red one especially, to make a lovely floral tea. And that floral tea, because of its intense color, is a rich source of antioxidants. And again, great for health, great for flavor, because I know that it's used in addition to making it as a tea, it is used otherwise hot or cold drink, and even in other cold applications. Now we can also get another related beverage brewed from sorrel, because sorrel is actually related to the decorative hibiscus. Sorrel is scientifically called Hibiscus sabdarifa, and sometimes I think persons are not aware of that linkage. And so we can get a similar floral and fruity tea from the sorrel, and that is used. Well, we know sorrel is very linked to tradition around the Christmas period, as a drink, as a beverage, a cold beverage, but it is also used as a tea.
Yeah.
In terms of medicinal applications, one of the popular ones used is cerasee bush, Mamordica tarantia, also called bitter melon. This is a potent medicinal, and not one that persons would make with a casual brewing of tea to sit and have a lovely cup, because the principles produced by the bitter melon, as so called, are bitter. And so the plant is acknowledged and respected for its medicinal properties, and it is used mainly for colds and flu, and also for the treatment of diabetes. And I understand that because I didn't grow up seeing my grandmother make cerasee tea. But in terms of when we interview individuals, it is prepared by boiling the entire plant, it's a vine, and it is boiled, but it's boiled for a very short period because, again, traditional knowledge informed us that if we boil for too long a period, we would inactivate the important compounds that the plant produces. And it is then strained and bottled and refrigerated and used accordingly. And also, it is used in minor amounts, maybe once or twice a day. So there's a rich tradition um, that is around the use of our plants, and more and more scholars are looking to unearth these important narratives and have them documented, which is what we're really missing.
No, that's great because I know as a child, especially Cersei tea, I would have that at certain times of the year where my mother would definitely be boiling exactly what you said, and that's exactly how it was used. And I wasn't exactly the most kindest to, be receptive to having Cersei tea because it is very bitter, and it's, you're practically drowning it in sugar just for you to,
Just to make it
just,
palatable.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So, yeah,
Interesting thing as well, however, is that in the use of that tea for diabetes, scientifically, they've discovered compounds that are indeed able to regulate the metabolism of sugar in the body.
yeah.
And that reinforces the anti-diabetic properties of cerasee.
Hmm. And I know as well for sorrel as well that yes, it is used primarily, during Christmas, but
Yes.
I now see that it's, used throughout the year because of the very properties that you're talking
Yes.
about for it
Yes.
as well. So, would there be any specific ceremonies or practices associated with the preparation and consumption of some of these Caribbean teas as well?
Yeah. It's another aspect that I'm very interested in myself.
Yeah.
We know that other cultures have got a well-defined tradition in terms of how a tea is prepared. They're very specific about the space in which that tea is prepared. They're very specific about the state of mind. They're very specific about how we handle, you know, the teapot, and how we pour, and how we consume.
Hmm.
And with us losing a lot of the heritage knowledge, I have not been able to unearth um, a coherent tradition associated with how we execute in terms of that type of definition. However, we do know that there's some aspects that are still around.
Hmm.
One of them that has sparked my interest again is the use of odd numbers of leaves. You would hear some individuals who tell you that you can only use odd numbers of leaves if you want your medicinal tea to be effective. So we're talking about 3 or 5 leaves.
Okay.
And that, yeah, that I've been trying to find out the source of that, and the closest I've come is to the African, um, I want to say comprehension, but in their culture, how they have um, manipulated their number system. And within their number system, they link even and odd numbers to outcomes. Odd numbers are linked to good outcomes, and even numbers are linked to not so good outcomes. I want to say not so good in terms of bad. And I think that the use of the odd numbers of these is probably linked to that infusion of African culture within our running gardening culture. In addition to that, the drying of the leaves. So I'm looking at the process from, you select your leaves and then you're taking it through into the tea preparation. The drying of the leaves. I remember again as a child, my grandmother hanging, her orange rind from the ceiling, allowing it to dry. I see you acknowledging that as well, and generally using solar. We're talking about energy and solar energy, but back then they understood the importance of what our environment could provide for us. And the sun was used to dry the leaves until they were devoid of moisture. And that had important elements in that the preservation of the plant material, of course, is best if it is devoid of moisture, because moisture can incur the development of microorganisms that can impact on the tea. Only recently, I was reading about a company in Jamaica that is a tea producer, and they're taking extreme precautions to make sure that such things are not happening. So here we're seeing that knowledge is permeating into our developing business culture around the production of teas. So using the sun to dry the leaves was very important, although you could use green leaves as well, but those had to be used immediately. So that is the preparation of the plant material. It had to be dry invariably, because that also increases the potency of the brew. And in terms of preparation now, um, we have found that the tea can be prepared either by an infusion or a decoction. So an infusion, you actually have your hot water, boiling water, you add it to your 3 or 5 leaves in your cup, and that hot water will extract the important components in the leaf. A decoction, as I described for the cerasee bush, is where you now boil the plant material for a brief period. And this was adopted really more for the medicinal type of tea preparation. Again, traditional knowledge allowed them to understand that if you want to increase the potency of a tea and have it function as a medicinal tea, that you needed to use additional heat, but you needed to use that additional heat for a short period. And so using a decoction is well expressed by those with good knowledge in order to get a more potent tea. And then in the storage, I've described that the medicinal teas are stored, again, to make sure that the life is extended, the usefulness is extended. And I remember part of our older tradition is the tea was best served in a beautiful enamel cup. Yeah, we switched to ceramic um, or the clay type product in the more modern times, but that cup of tea was best served in a beautiful coated enamel cup. So those are the elements of our tradition that I am aware of. Of course, we understand that there's a spirituality involved as well.
Yeah.
And I think that families will have, their own individual tradition that they live up to. But in terms of a distinctive Caribbean tradition, I think it has all of the elements that I just
Yes.
described.
Yeah.
And again, it is really about putting this on paper and having it documented. And this is something that my nonprofit association, the Bicultural Education and Research Program that I established in 2017, that is something that we are working
Oh, that's great because I mean, what you're describing, I mean, we're just doing things just because it's been passed down from one generation to another, but
on. Yes,
not really recognizing what that means. But
yes,
I'm sure a lot of people that are listening are probably saying, "Yeah, this is what I do too," or what I grew up, you know, hearing and doing. So it's just nice to know that there are some defined, at least some for it as well. So. I know that you mentioned about in terms of the rich biodiversity within the Caribbean. Like, how
yes.
do some of these local ingredients contribute to the variety and the flavor of these Caribbean teas?
Yeah. Very important question. The Caribbean is identified as one of the hotspots of biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
And so important is it that we have identifiable scientists have estimated that we have got 72% endemic plants in the Caribbean. So that means that 72% of the plants that we find in the Caribbean are found only in the Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to be careful here, and it doesn't mean that plants cannot be, taken out
Exactly.
of the natural environment. But in terms of what has been traced, is that it's estimated that 72% of our plants can be found only in the Caribbean in terms of the source. And there's some islands that have an extremely high percentage of endemic character. Cuba being one of these islands, I think they've got something like 50% endemicity within their plant resource. So what that means is that we've got a lot of plants that have um, peculiar not in a bad way, peculiar in a novel way to our Caribbean. And I think it is related, of course, to the geology of the region, but
Mm-hmm.
it's also related to the climate of the region. We're a tropical climate. It's related to the nature of our soils. That can be, well, in Barbados, they are more along the alkaline side because of our limestone. And then collectively, the type of organic material that the plants are growing through. So we find that the plants do have a lot of novel notes in them. And they're plants also, therefore, that we utilize that are not native to the Caribbean. But while they're growing in the Caribbean over a long period of time, they develop what we call phenotypic characters. And these phenotypic characters are the result of the plants growing within our environment and therefore demonstrating some unique properties because of the temperature, the day cycle, the nature of the soil, the nature of other plants growing around them. Something that individuals don't realize is that plants protect themselves, and they protect themselves even in terms of what grows around them. Plants can produce substances that hinder the growth of other plants. They produce substances that hinder animals from feeding on them. And I am raising these issues to demonstrate that the plants in our Caribbean islands then will therefore be producing unique notes, and these unique notes translate themselves into our teas. One of the plants whose root it has become signature within the Caribbean, both as a culinary entity and also a medicinal entity, of course, is ginger. And we know that ginger, yeah, it pervades everything we do. It does have that potency, and that potency is useful for in all of our culinary dishes. It's important in our confectionery, and it's important in our teas. Um, Bay leaf is another one. Bay leaf, though this one is thought to be native to the Caribbean, is beautifully aromatic, and it is also extremely rich in antioxidants. We hear antioxidants being touted commercially in order to get product into the minds of the consumer. But antioxidants really are important for health, and bay leaf is one source. And its aromatic notes are extremely beautiful, and we utilize that in our particular brand of tea quite a bit. I am sold on bay leaf.
Mhm.
um, I may have also mentioned a little earlier, I think, that the mint family and the aromas that we get from the mint family have become extremely important. We also have a plant here that is called Ducky basil. It's called mosquito bush. And likewise, very, very aromatic. And again, used for colds and flu because of that property, and will make a very aromatic tea. So, you know, biodiversity is rich in the Caribbean. How the plants in our biodiverse unit respond to nature and what's around it will impact on what the plant produces. And then, of course, we use our senses in order to select these plants.
Yeah, definitely. It's just something to, take in all these seeds, as you said, just the smell, the taste, the flavor, and all the different aromas once they're all combined or taken individually. And so, as yourself, you're an advocate for Caribbean teas. How have you been involved? I know you've mentioned some of your educational initiatives, but to
Yeah.
further promote in the awareness and the understanding of teas, can you just talk a
Yes.
bit to that?
Hmm. Um, it, it has been such an interest of mine that even when I was still in my academic posting, I used to give workshops. And these would be internal workshops, and they were so well attended because um, there is that clamor for that type of reconnection,
Yes.
that understanding of our traditional knowledge, and just interfacing with the knowledge. And I would conduct workshops where we examine what is described as the organoleptic properties, and that involves smell, that involves taste. We could even have persons detect the medicinal properties of a tea from a plant, because your tongue is really an instrument. Your nose is an instrument. And so we would do a lot of that quality work in reintroducing persons to the plants that we know to be part of our tradition. As I mentioned, things like ginger, turmeric, cerasee, bay leaf, soursop. We would always make sure, there's some of the plants that give you more bitter notes.
Mm-hmm.
There's some that give you sweeter notes, and there's some that give you what are described as earthy notes. And we would do workshops reconnecting individuals with that, because we know these are the elements that our ancestors, without thinking, would have utilized when they were sourcing plants, for health as well as nutritious drinks. And it's very important to do that. So as I came out and formed the nonprofit, that has continued, and we have a number of sessions. Um, we actually made a documentary called Healing Roots. And that documentary, if anyone is interested, is on YouTube. And that is the title, Healing Roots. And we interviewed a number of elders in the community, a number of practitioners, and even a young person, because we wanted to understand this root knowledge. Is it really dying, or is it being passed on? And the unfortunate conclusion coming out of that is that as we lose our elders, we are losing the root knowledge. And this only refueled my passion for making sure that we get out into the communities and share this knowledge. In addition to that, I did mention that we have a brand of tea as well, and we felt that that carried a dual responsibility because we know that we import quite too much into the region. And you go to the supermarkets and you see a myriad of teas, and these teas are basically based on Camellia sinensis, the plant that gives you your green or black tea. And we felt it important to demonstrate that we could produce teas based on our local heritage. And so our brand of tea called Heritage Teas is based on that tradition. And we have tried to capture, even in our slogans, we say that sipping on a cup of heritage tea is equivalent to sipping on tradition. When you sip that cup of tea,
Yes.
you're sipping on history, because your ancestors were the first who saw this plant material as important for what the leaves contain. But we have put a twist on it because you also want to be innovative. And so we have blended plants together. We have made an effort not to blend too many at one time because from my chemistry background, I know that you still have to be careful in terms of how compose your formulation. But we have blended and we are using the more aromatic plants out there. We're using a lot of ginger, we're using a lot of cinnamon, more as an accent note. However, we're using bay leaf, we're using the beautiful lemongrass, and soursop, and we blend them into a number of different teas. We've got one called cinnabay, which is cinnamon and bay leaf. We've got lemon ginger, lemongrass and ginger. We've got one based on sorrel called rose ginger. There are many others, but I wouldn't want to keep our discussion based on our brand. But the importance of telling you about the brand is that we wanted to demonstrate the value of our traditional knowledge, the economic value of the traditional knowledge. And there is a very close link between biodiversity and biocultural traditions. So by us making these plants visible and important, we are contributing to conservation of biocultural knowledge and conservation of biodiversity.
Yes, absolutely. And those combinations that you mentioned are very, very nice. And, some of the things that I kind of grew up with in terms of with teas and the importance of them. So, do you have a personal favorite among the Caribbean teas and what about it does it make it special to you?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, to be honest. But I probably am leaning towards bay leaf in terms of the plant source. And I'm leaning towards bay leaf not only from its aromatic quality. I mean, bay leaf is exceptional in terms of what it offers in flavor profile and also in terms of um, its aromatic character. But I've done some testing of bay leaf, and it is very potent in antioxidants. So when you drink a cup of bay leaf, um, there's that ancestral link, of course, but there's also the medicinal value from my level of assessment. So I'm very in tuned to bay leaf as a tea, both in terms of what it means about our tradition and also in terms of what I identify in terms of its health contribution. So that is the plant source. Out of our brand of teas, I am also that much a fan of one of the teas made from with bay leaf as an important component, and that is called Bay Cafe. And I think the name kind of gives it away. It's got bay leaf, it has got salsa, it has a hint of coffee, and it has cinnamon. It's the most beautiful. When I am actually formulating Bay Cafe, I have to resist just sitting there and taking in the
Yes.
essence that it gives forward. It's a beautiful aroma, and we we like to offer our supporters, our consumers, the option of having that in the tea bag, which is non-traditional because we would not have been using tea bags. But in terms of contemporary functionality, a tea bag, you get your tea bag, put it into your teacup, and you can get your quick access to tea. But we also offer it as what we call a loose tea. So you can have that loose tea and then go through our traditional steps of preparing your cup of tea from that loose tea. Extremely beautiful, and I think it is reinforcing my leaning towards bay leaf as a favorite.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you so much, Dr. Peter. And now, with like, how do you now envision the future of Caribbean teas, both in the preserving of the traditional practices and, of course, exploring new innovations?
Yeah. Another beautiful question because from my perspective, again, I'm I'm very interested in us demonstrating our resilience. Um, we know that during COVID, and um, I don't know if you happen to be in the region at any time during COVID. Okay. But it was really kind of disheartening to witness how dependent we were on imports getting to the island. And, we had to have a system whereby we would allow persons alphabetically to go to the supermarket to make their purchases. And I remember saying to someone that if um, this had happened during the period when my grandmother was alive, who was a very resilient person, um, managing, or accessible resources as best as she could. I don't think she would have had the problem that we were always experiencing because she was able to be self-sufficient. And so it's important for me that the region recognize the need for us to be more self-sufficient. I won't be naive to think that we will not have to do some dependence on external, sources, but I
Hmm.
think we can do more. We can do
Yes.
more with what we have, and I am heartened by seeing increased commercial activity around the production of tea. As I mentioned, that company in Jamaica, we know there is, and I think their product is Caribbean Dreams,
Hmm.
and they have worked on their standards to make sure that this is a product that can be on any supermarket shelf, and indeed they are across the Caribbean. There's some younger scientists who are putting their knowledge to work and are coming up with new brands of tea as well. And we are seeing that look to be reconnected with the tradition. And I think that the experience of COVID has sort of pushed us to take a look back. So I'm hopeful that we will stop leaking our traditional knowledge, and and more individuals are doing knowledge sharing, um, bringing greater confidence into how we use our plants because of that disconnection. Persons always say, well, I would really like to become involved, but I do not know what plants I should be using. I do not know how many leaves I should be using. I do not know how long I should boil. There's a lot of information that persons are still disconnected from and don't have access to. And so we have a number of organizations that are working to fill those gaps. And I am hopeful that the edition is going to see a reemergence. It is still alive, but I think among the younger generation, we need to give them that confidence. But it's changing, even in terms of persons who are sourcing heritage teas. We see that we're having a younger demographic. So I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful in terms of the spread of community knowledge. I'm hopeful in terms of the application of scientific knowledge. And I'm hopeful in terms of seeing an increase in the number of tea producers across the Caribbean.
Yes, no, thank you so much, Dr. Peter. I really do appreciate your time and for you coming on and speaking about Caribbean teas, and that this will still keep continuing because it is part of our innate heritage that we have, whether we realize it or not, but it's something that we have and it does continue. So thank you so much. And I will put all of what you've indicated in the show notes so people can be able to access those things as well.
Great. Thank you so much. I mean, you can see that I really do have a vested interest in the knowledge, getting into communities, and it's something that as long as I'm able to, I will continue to work in that vein. And I also want to laud you because I have been looking at your podcast, and I think you're making a very important contribution in whatever domain we can. We need to make sure that we document in some form or fashion our narratives that are important.
Thank you so much. Hoped you enjoyed this episode, and if you did, please make sure to like, follow, subscribe, and write a review for the episode wherever you listen to your podcast. Thank you.